Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn the Gemara Masechta Shabbos on Daf Hey Amud Aleph and Daf Hey Amud Beis. Let's begin with a general outline of this Sugya. Previously, we presented the teachings of Rava and Rabbi Yochanan that said that Yadei Shel Adam Chashuv Alei Kedalad Al Dalad. The hand of a person is considered significant to him as if it's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim, and therefore an akira from the hand of a person or a hanacha to the hand of a person is a good akira and a good hanacha. In this Gemara, we're going to present 3 teachings from Rabbi Yochanan related to the akira and the hanacha. That seems to be the connection to this sugya. It's like a side discussion. We mentioned Rabbi Yochanan and teaching about the akira and the hanacha. We'll now mention another 3 teachings from Rabbi Yochanan about the akira and the hanacha. The first one is about a case where the person separates the akira from the hanacha into 2 distinct parts, like we'll see in the Gemara. The second thing is when an item is not fully at rest. It doesn't seem to be fully at rest in a reshus. We're going to discuss what that is. Is the akira a good akira? And the third one is that a person needs to have kavana to do a malacha at the time of the akira. So the akira needs to be done with a kavana to be performing a malacha. So let's see now those 3 teachings in the flowchart form. So the first one's actually not a teaching in a direct way. It's more a question that Rabbi Yochanan asked. So this question is said in the context that we already learned that Amar Rav Avin, Amar Rabbi Loi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that if somebody threw an item 4 amas in Rishus Harabim and another person caught it, we said the din is it depends. If the catcher stood in one place, in other words, the person threw it, and the other individual was just standing there and it landed in his hand, then the thrower was chayiv. Since the thrower did akira, he also passed it to 4 amas, and the anacha is also attributed to him since it comes from him. However, if the catcher left this place to catch it, then the thrower is pater, because we only attribute the akira and the passing of 4 amas to the thrower. However, the anacha we attribute to the catcher since he went to catch it, it didn't land where it would have landed. We present, the Gemara then continues and says that we learned the same thing in a brayso in the name of Achirim. And now here we have the question of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan asked, what's the din if a person threw an item 4 amas in Rishus Harabim and then he himself ran that distance and caught the object? What's the din over there? So before we continue and answer that question, the Gemara asks a question on the question, which is, what's this question? And like Rashi explains, of course he should be chayiv since he did the whole malacha. He did the akira, he threw it to 4 amas, and then he ran and did the hanacha. So the individual did the entire malacha, so of course he should be chayiv. What was the question that Rabbi Yochanan asked? So Rav Ada bar Ava explains the question is shnei koiches ba'adam. If there's 2 forces in work by one person, it's 2 distinct forces. He did the throwing, that's one force, and then the hanacha, it didn't result from that one action, it was a separate action now. The person ran and caught it. What do we say? Do we say it's like 2 people in his pater? Just like if the case where one person threw it, another person caught it, they're pater. The reason they're pater is because each one only has part of the malacha. The first person only has the akira. The anacha of that akira never happened, was never actualized, because a different anacha took place. And the one who did the anacha didn't have an akira attached to his action. So say the same thing by one person. When he did the akira and he passed it 4 amas, there was no hanacha to that akira, since the anacha of that akira never ended up happening. It was going to land at a different area. And when he did the hanacha by catching it, there's no akira attached to that. So do we basically look at it as 2 separate things? Just like if a person did akira of one eitzah and he did a hanacha of a different eitzah, we don't attach them. Also here we don't attach it. The akira never had its hanacha, and the hanacha never had its akira. Rather, it was 2 separate forces. So do we say it's like 2 people in his pater? Or do we say it's like one person in his chayiv? We say, listen, one action was done over here, passing 4 amas in Rishus Harabim, and one individual did all parts of this action, of this malacha. He did the akira, he did the avara, and he did the anacha. So therefore he's chayiv. So that's the question that Rabbi Yochanan had. The Gemara answers, let the question stand. We don't have an answer to this question. So here we have the first question. It's not a teaching, it's a question of Rabbi Yochanan regarding what happens if a person threw the item 4 amas in Rishus Harabim, and then he himself ran and caught it, so he did a hanacha different than the hanacha that would have happened. We explained the question is, do we combine those 2 things or do we separate them? And we said teku. Now we'll continue on to the next teaching. Again, Amar Rav Avin, Amar Rabbi Loi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. He said that if somebody placed his hand into another's yard and received rainwater and brought it out, he's chayiv. So if somebody puts his hand, when he's in Rishus Harabim, he extends his hand into Rishus Yachid while it's raining and he catches rainwater and he brings it out, he's chayiv for the malacha of itzah. So the Gemara asks, why is he chayiv? This is a question from Rabbi Zeir. Why is he chayiv? Mali hitine chaverei, mali hitine shamayim. What's it to me if his fellow put something into his hand? What's it to me if the heavens put something in his hand? Just like when his fellow put something in his hand and he brings it out, he's not chayiv since he didn't do the akira. So the same should be the case when the heavens put rainwater in his hand and he brings it out. He shouldn't either be chayiv since he didn't do the akira. So the Gemara says, we're going to explain it to we're going to change it from kibble, not that he received rainwater, but we're going to say kalat, he collected rainwater. And the way we understand it at this point is that what he did is he slapped the rainwater with one hand into the other. So in this case, he did the akira. He hit it into the hand, so we have an akira. The Gemara continues in its questioning and says, although we have the akira, we don't have an akira from an area that's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. He hit it out of the ear. It's not an area that's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. So the Gemara responds, Rabbi Chia Berei de Ravuna says, it's referring to that he hit it from a wall. He didn't hit it out of the ear, he hit it from the wall, and the wall has 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. So here we established that there is an akira, and it is from an area that's 4 by 4 tvachim. But the Gemara continues and says, we're still missing a requirement. But it's flowing and not resting on a place that's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. It's not enough that he did an akira, and that it's from an area that's 4 by 4 tvachim. It's also necessary for it to be resting on that area. And if it's just flowing down the wall, it's not at rest. So the Gemara answers, it's like Rava said, that the wall was a sloping wall. So therefore it comes out that first we questioned there's no akira, we said there is an akira. Then we questioned that it's not from an area that's 4 by 4, we said that it is because it's on the wall. And then we questioned that it's not at rest, and here we're answering it's based on what Rava said elsewhere, that it's a sloping wall, so therefore it is at rest. Before the Gemara continues in its questioning, the Gemara says, when did Rava say this? So we mentioned it's like Rava said elsewhere. Ask the Gemara, where did Rava say this? So the Gemara answers, Rava said it on a Mishnah, and we'll show in a moment where Rava said it. It says in the Mishnah that if a person was on the doorstep of a house, and the Gemara explains over there that it's a Carmelis. So he's on the doorstep of a house, and he's reading from a sefer, and a sefer in those days was like a Megillah. So the Gemara, it says over there in the Mishnah that if the sefer rolled out of his hand, and only one end is in his hand, the other hand now is in Rosh Hashanah, so he's in a Carmelis, and one end of the sefer is in his hand, the other end is in Rosh Hashanah, the Mishnah says he could roll it back. The reason he's allowed to roll it back is because since he's in a Carmelis to a Rosh Hashanah, which the whole thing is only Midrabanan, therefore the Rabbanan didn't make a Gzeira that he can't bring it back, since anyway it's not as if the whole thing went into the Rosh Hashanah, half is still in his hand. So since the whole issue at hand over here is one of Midrabanan, they didn't make a Gzeira, being that half is still in his hand. However, if he's on a roof, and he had the sefer and the other one half rolled out, so now he's in a Rosh Hashanah to a Rosh Hashanah, which is Minatera. So although he still has one half in his hand, if there's an issue Minatera, we're going to make a Gzeira that he can't bring it back. Says the Mishnah, if he rolled above 10 tefachim, so it didn't yet enter the Rosh Hashanah, it's in the area that's a Makam P'tor, he's allowed to roll it back. However, once it rolled within 10 tefachim, he's not allowed to roll it back, and since now it's in Rosh Hashanah, he's in Rosh Hashanah. So although half is in his hand and only half is there, the Rabbanan made a Gzeira, they did not permit him to bring it back. And regarding this, it was asked, so the din is he has to therefore turn it over so that the writing is facing downwards, so we don't embarrass the sefer, in order to respect the sefer. And it was asked on this teaching, why does he have to turn it over? It never rested. There's no issue of Minateva here. It's not that it's Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, since it's not at rest in the Rosh Hashanah. And regarding this, Rava answered that it was a sloping wall, so it was at rest. At any rate, here we presented where Rava said it. He said it regarding the din of the sefer that the person was holding. But the point in our discussion is that the water was, number one, there wasn't a kira because he hit it, and he hit it from a wall, which is 4 by 4 tefachim, and it was sloping, so therefore it's at rest. The Gemara says this is not a good enough answer still, and the reason is because maybe that's only by a scroll. It's a solid, so it could be resting on on the slope. However, here we're talking about water. It's a liquid. It's running down the slope. It's not at rest. So therefore, the Gemara rejects this whole line of reasoning that we're referring to when he hit it off a wall that was sloping. And the Gemara presents a different answer. Ella Amar Rava, rather Rava explained that it's referring to that the person picked up water from a hole. There was water in a hole in Rosh Hashanah. He extended his hand in and brought it out. So he's chayiv. Asked the Gemara, this can't be the teaching of Rabbi Yechanan because it's obvious. Of course, if a person carries something from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, of course he's chayiv. That's the malacha of Eitzah. The Gemara responds that there is a chiddush over here, and the chiddush is that you might say that the water that he scooped out of the hole, he didn't take all the water out. He took some of the water. So that water, maybe it's not considered at rest, since water on water is not considered resting. It's floating. And therefore it comes to teach us that the water on water is considered resting. And the reason why it's considered resting is because we don't say the top water is resting on the lower water. Rather, we look at the whole water as one entity, and we say the water is resting in the whole. So there we explain the teaching of Rabbi Yechanan is that water is considered resting even when it's on water. Now we're going to move on to a side discussion related to this. But before we do that, we're going to mention that this is consistent with Rava's opinion, that water on water is considered resting, but a nut on water isn't considered resting. So if there's water on water, we look at it as one entity, and it's resting in the container, whatever it is, the area that it's within. However, if there's a nut that's floating on the water, and the water is in a container, then we say that the nut is not resting. Since it's floating on the water, it's not considered at rest. Now we're going to move on to a side discussion, since we mentioned this thing from Rava about water on water and the nut on water. I'm going to present a question and a teaching. So the first thing is a question from Rava himself, and Rava asked, what's the din if there is a, let's see the question, Rava asked, if a person picked up a nut that's in a container that's floating on water. So we know water on water is resting, a nut on water is not. But what happens if there was a nut in a container that's on water? What do we say then? Do we look at the nut and say the nut's at rest? It's resting in the container, and therefore if the person took it out from that rishus, he's chayiv. Or do we say no, the nut is in the container which is not resting? So we look at the container and say, since the container is not at rest, therefore the nut's not either at rest. And the response was, Teku, let the question stand. We don't have an answer. So do we just focus on the nut, the item that was lifted out of that rishus, and say it was resting? Or do we say it's not enough that the nut's resting, also that what the nut is resting in needs to be resting, and it's not, since it's floating on water? Then the next thing we mention is that if oil is floating on wine, it's an argument between Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and the Rabbanon. When there's oil on wine, or as Rashi says, it could be water. It's mentioned wine. We mentioned wine because we'll see in a moment they were talking about truma, which involves wine. So if there is oil on top of wine or on top of water, then it's a machlekes. Let's just bring up a scroll over here that'll explain it. If somebody lifted up oil that's floating on wine or water and then placed it into another rishus, the Rabbanan say he's patur, since the oil is floating on the water and it isn't at rest. Just like a nut on water is not at rest, oil on water is not at rest. However, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says he is chayiv since both liquids are resting on the container. Just like water from water, the person is chayiv because we say that it's all at rest in the container. He says they say the same thing with oil and wine. We say the whole thing is resting in the container since they're both liquid. Where do we see that they argue about this? Because they argue about this case in a different context. And that is, it says in the Mishnah that if oil of truma was floating on wine of truma, and a tvul yom touched the oil, so the oil is certainly tummy. How about the wine? So then it's machlekes. The Rabbanan say only the oil is possible. So we see that the Rabbanan separate between the oil and the wine. They say the oil is possible, not the wine. That means they're separate entities. So also for Shabbos, we look at them as separate entities, and the oil is considered resting on the wine, and that's not a proper resting, since it's floating. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says they are both possible. So we see that he looks at it as one entity, and therefore, just like for Truma they're one entity, they're also looked at as one entity, that they're both resting in the container. At any rate, this was a side discussion in what we mentioned, the teaching of Rabbi Yochanan, that water on water is considered at rest, and therefore if a person carries water out of one rishus into another, even though he took some of the water out only, he's chayav for the malacha. Now we're going to continue to the last and final teaching of Rabbi Yochanan. Again, Amar Rav Avin, Amar Rabbi Loi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. If somebody was carrying food and drink, and he was nichnas v'yetze kol hayom, he was walking in and out of the rishus hayachid all day, he isn't chayav until he stops and then carries again. So we're going to bring up a scroll to explain this for a moment. This is a case where a person lifted the items with the intention of moving them to another corner in their house. So a person picked up some things. Let's just give an example. He wanted to put them in a different corner of the house. There wasn't room where he was. And then he decided that he doesn't want to bring it to the other corner. He's going to take it outside. So on Shabbos, it's necessary for the whole malacha to be done with intent. And here the Akira wasn't done with the intent of doing a malacha. He planned on taking it to a different corner of the house. After he picked it up, he decided, let's say he decided to throw it out in the garbage. He took it out to the Rishus Harabim. So he's not going to be chayev. Therefore, he's patur when he carries it outside, unless he stops and then starts again with the intention of doing a malacha. He'll only be chayev if, as he's walking out, he stops and then he continues walking out. Or he walked out and then he brought it back in, but before he brought it back in, he stopped, and then when he brought it back in, he had the intention to bring it in. Only then will he be chayev, since the akir needs to be with the kavanah. So Abaye now mentions a teaching on this, and that is v'husha amad lafash. He's only chayiv if he stopped to rest, but if he stopped to adjust the stuff, he isn't chayiv. So the person lifted up the items to take it to a different corner. He changes his mind. He decides to take it outside. If he stops and then continues taking it outside, he's chayiv, but only if he stopped to rest, not if he stopped just to adjust the items that he's holding. How do we know this? So we say we know it. So the Gemara doesn't ask it as a question. How do we know this? It's more in a question form, but leading straight to the answer. How do we know this? Says the Gemara, and it goes straight into the answer. That's why it's an arrow, but we still have the red and green. Because Rabbah taught that if somebody was carrying in Rishus Harabim, somebody was carrying 4 amas in Rishus Harabim, we know that he's chayiv. Rabbah taught the following. If he stopped within 4 amas, so he carried from the beginning of 4 amas to the end of 4 amas. The din is if he stopped within 4 amas, If he stopped to rest, he's pater. Since now that he stopped to rest, he created two distinct carryings, so neither one has a full 4 amas. So he never carried 4 amas in Rosh Hashanah, therefore he's pater. However, if he stopped to adjust the stuff, then he's chayiv. If he only stopped after 2 amas, let's say, to adjust the items, that's not considered a real stop. Therefore, it's considered one carrying, and he's chayiv. So already from there, we see that a stopping to adjust something is not considered proper stopping, and stopping to rest is considered a proper stop. We're going to present the whole teaching of Rabbah. If he stopped outside of 4 amas, it's the opposite. If he stopped to rest, so he walked to 4 amas and then he stopped to rest, that's considered that he completed the malacha and he's chayiv. However, if when he stopped after those 4 amas, it was to adjust the stuff, then he's pater, since that's not considered yet that he completed the malacha. So there we have the teaching of Rabbi Yechanan, we have the explanation of Abaya, and then the support, how do we know what Abaya said? Here the Gemara now asks a question. And that is, what is he teaching us over here? What's this teaching of Rabbi Yechanan? Is he teaching us that the original akira has to be with the intention to carry it out? That he has to have the kavanah to do the malacha? It can't be that this is what Rabbi Yechanan is teaching us, because he already taught it once. How do we know he taught it once? So here we have it from Rav Safra. Amar Rav Safra, Amar Rav Ami, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. And here he says it more clearly, that somebody who is moving items from one corner in his house to another corner in the house, and then he changed his mind while walking to the other corner, and decided to take them out, he said outright, he's pater because his original akira wasn't for that purpose. So here we have clearly this teaching from Rabbi Yechanan. So it can be that Amar Rav Av and Amar Rabbi Loi, Amar Rabbi Yechanan is teaching us this idea because he was already taught once. And the Gemara answers, it is the same teaching, and Rabbi Yechanan only taught it once. However, Rav Av and Amar Rabbi Loi taught it in his way, and Rav Safra, Amar Rabbi Ami taught it in his way. So there we have the third and final teaching of Rabbi Yechanan, that the person needs a kavanah to do the malacha throughout the entire malacha. He mainly focused on the akira. So now we'll present a bigger flowchart of all these pieces so we can see them together. And we'll present the first one, the second one, and third one. You'll be able to see visually all 3 of them. So the first thing is we presented the teaching of Rabbi Yechanan, that the original teaching that if the catcher caught it in his place or if the catcher moved, and then we presented that we have the same thing in a brisa. And then we asked, what happens if the person did akira and anacha? He ran to catch it. We asked, what's the question? Of course, he did the whole malacha. We explained what the question was. And then we answered, Teiku, let the question stand. That's the first teaching from Rabbi Yechanan. The second teaching from Rabbi Yechanan is if somebody placed his hand into another yard and brought out into another's yard, he's Rosh Hashanah, when he's in Rosh Hashanah, and he carried out water, we said he's going to be chayiv. So we asked, why is he chayiv? There's no akira. We tried to explain that there's an akira because he hid it in his hand. We insisted that it's still not good enough because it's not from an area that's 4x4. We said it's from the wall. We said it's still not good enough because it's not at rest in the wall. We explained that it's referring to a sloping wall like Rava told us elsewhere. We presented that place of Rava where he spoke elsewhere, the case of the scroll that rolled out of the person's hand. And the Gemara then concluded that it's still not a good enough answer because water is not at rest. And as a result, we presented the alternative answer, that this is referring to a case that it was water on water. It was fully at rest. It's talking about that he took it out of a hole. The Gemara then asked that it's obvious. We explained why it's not obvious, because you would think that the water is not considered at rest on top of other water. And we said that this is consistent with Rava telling us that water is considered at rest on water. But a nut is not considered at rest on water. And then we got into the side discussion, what happens if it's a nut in a container on water, and we left that as teiku. And then we mentioned that regarding oil on water or on wine, then it'll be a machlekes, and we brought it down. And then the third and final teaching from Rabbi Yechanan was what we just mentioned, that a person needs kavanah. We explained over there that he's only chayiv if he stops and then has kavanah. We mentioned that it has to be lafush, he has to stop to rest, and we brought down the source, memai. We brought it down from Rabbah. So here we have that teaching that a person has to have kavanah, and that a person needs a complete stop in order to be considered that it came to an end, what he did till now, and he's starting something new. And then we asked that he already taught it once, and we explained he only taught it once, and each one of these Amoraim was saying it over in his way. So it comes out that we have over here, we'll just show how they're distinct. There's 3 parts. We have over here the 3 teachings of Rabbi Yechanan. The first one, that the question if the person separates the akira and the anocha, and we left it at teiku. The second one, about a person taking water from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, and we had to explain that it's referring to that he carried water from water, and the whole discussion about whether it's resting or not, and the other examples. And the last and final one is that a person needs kavanah to do the malach at the time of the akira.